waste processing and water treatment arts. He is the author of 25 patents in this field, with 5 more patents pending. He has also authored 34 international patents. During his career, he has led responsibility in over 800 civil engineering projects. Beginning in 1989, he has been working with emerging economies in Africa, Asia, India, the Americas, Europe, the Pacific Rim, and the Near East to establish a framework for new methods of waste management, with an emphasis on producing economically viable products from waste, all without government subsidies. The most recent awarded patents relate to the conversion of waste to fuels and feed products, the severance of carbon-sulfur bonds and used rubber and sub-dew point emission control with the commercial recovery of acids and toxic metals from air combustion. As a co-founder, current CEO, and chairman of the board of Genesis International Incorporated, the company is on track to realize a backlog of over $1 billion in construction funding for plants converting waste materials to renewable fuels in 2009. Now, without further ado, please join me in introducing Mr. James Titmuss.
Some of the electronics here organized a little bit. I want to emphasize that Genesis International strives to work in the private arena. One of the problems I've always had with in dealing with that little town up on the Potomac, this is a clue to our friend with the fusion problem. In the waste field, we found that when you're dealing with the federal government, a $200 million project is 10 times more important than a $20 million project, even if both do exactly the same thing. It's a bit of a caution. But in the private arena, that really doesn't hold. What we want to do is strive for something that is commercially viable without subsidy. We're looking at see if we can get through this thing here. I want to talk about each one of these things individually as we go through the presentation. A plant has to have about 80% utilization of its capacity during the year to make a profit. You can't operate a plant for 1 or 2 months and then expect it to sit idle for the rest of the time. We want the effective use of delivered negative cost raw materials. In the waste industries, people will pay you to bring the materials to your door for you to process, what we call a negative cost raw material. That's an important baseline for what we're trying to do. It is true that agricultural waste or agricultural materials could make more ethanol or more synthetic fuel, but it's a positive cost raw material. And we're looking at those factors that actually make the conversion of waste to the production of biofuels as a viable business, something that can make its own rewards. Minimum use of energy, especially fossil fuels, public acceptance of the project, safe, effective, efficient use of manpower, effective staff training with quality control, some 30 years in my engineering career, one of my lead responsibilities was in troubleshooting and keeping track of what happens when something goes wrong. Most common practice, most common problem that's discovered was a problem of staff training for the staff and employees working as a team. We're looking for a very disciplined engineering design without shortcuts. We want mature and established supporting industrial and permitting base. The people who review and grant permits are one of our stopgaps that hold us and keep our feet to the fire to ensure that we've handled all the necessary problems. And quite frankly, from the experience of working with engineering design, and you get time to just put your name on the bottom of the page and say, yes, this will work, it's very important that you have some confidence and backup. We also want to be able to produce a factory that can be insured for efficacy, safety, and have this backed up and reviewed by the various insurance companies. They have good staff, they know exactly what they're looking for, and they too are a backup just like the state permit people. We want the freedom to market products without financing contract restraints. Quite often the lending agency says, well, you know, you're going to make ethanol, or you're going to make this fuel or that fuel. We want to see you have a contract with the people that are going to buy the material. Unfortunately, if that costs you a 25 or 20% penalty as to the value of that fuel, just to make sure you have a buyer, it's really self-defeating, especially with something that is so broadly practiced as the production of ethanol, which is, for all practical purposes, a fungible product, which is sold internationally in great quantities. It really isn't difficult to find a buyer, especially if your production costs might be half that of the people that make ethanol from corn. And you also have to have a company that's free from any litigation. There's few things that will interfere with a new business than a lawsuit over environmental matters or something like that. You may have heard of the Masada project in New York before the unfortunate passing of Darrell Hines. They ended up in a lawsuit with the environmental people and delayed them 3 years while their permits expired. So you have to have something that has acceptance and be able to manage that sort of thing without any problem. This is a project that we were putting together in the United Kingdom, and this is what we call a load duration curve. The peak loading is on the left, and then we have the loading every day for the rest of the year. And you see by this particular layout that there's a huge capacity in the plant here that's just not used. This project had to be rejected and redesigned so that we could make it economically viable. And the way to do it would be to work with something besides just harvested products. We really could not rely on a seasonal harvest, one harvest per year. The raw materials coming off of harvest deteriorate rather quickly, and they can't be stored for a year. The only long-term loading that we had happened to be the harvesting of wood, or